Hello again. Time now for the second presentation. Don't throw in the towel, throw in trade credit. That's the name of this paper, written by Beata Javorcik from Oxford, and Banu Demi from Bilkent University, and Joana Silva from the World Bank will be the discussant. Beata, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here and talk about trade credit. I apologize to those of you who have seen this paper. It used to be circulated under a different title. We do have other projects with Banu, one measuring riskiness, sensitivity to risk of trade transaction, one on proposing 2 new methods of detecting tariff evasion. But none of these projects is streamlined enough to lend itself to a 30-minute presentation, so therefore you're stuck with this paper. Now, as you all know, one of the questions that has been preoccupying international trade economists for quite a while is how firms adjust to globalization, or how firms adjust to increased competition. And the answers that we have been given are quite powerful, quite intuitive, right? Firms adjust to increased competition by exiting. It's the weak firms that exit and the strong firms expand. Firms adjust their product portfolio in response to increased competition. They drop the peripheral products, they expand their core products, products at which they are really good. Now, in this paper, we propose another margin of adjustment. We say, firms respond to increased competition by offering trade credit. So the question we are asking in this paper, is there evidence that a shock to competitiveness, to the level of competition in the export market leads firms to respond by extending more trade credit? And the inspiration for this paper comes from a brochure or from a booklet that's prepared by the US Department of Commerce for American exporters. That's advice that's given by the US administration to firms that want to export. And this advice says, if you want to sell abroad and you insist on being prepaid, on getting the money up front, on getting cash in advance, that actually may cost you the business. That if you insist on being prepaid, actually the customers may go to somebody else who will offer them better payment terms. Similarly, the US Department of Commerce says that offering open account, i.e. offering trade credit, may help you win customers in competitive markets, right? And in a sense, that's what we are testing in this paper. So for the remaining 28 minutes or so, I will try to convince you that we have a credible exogenous shock that helps us identify an answer to this question. I will try to convince you that increasing competition faced by Turkish exporters in the European market led them to increase provision of trade credit. It has led them to lower prices, and that there is evidence suggesting that there is substitution between these 2 margins of adjustment. Our paper is related to several literatures. Now, we know that access to finance matters because it allows firms to export. We contribute to this literature by showing that it may matter particularly if you're trying to export to tough markets. Because what you need is not just access to finance to cover your working capital requirements, you also need access to finance to actually be competitive by offering trade credit. You can also think of this paper as being related to broader literature, so finance literature on domestic trade credit. Now, this literature hasn't been able to identify in a credible way the link between competition and provision of trade credit, because in these studies that we have at the moment have relied mostly on survey evidence, and they were not able to really sort out causality. So we hope that actually that's something we can do. And finally, we are related to the literature that deals explicitly with financing terms on which export transaction takes place by pointing out another dimension that shapes how, what terms are being chosen. So let me start with the institutional context. So the shock that we are going to explain is the end of the multi-fiber arrangement. So since the 1970s, international trade in textile and clothing has been or was governed by a complex set of bilateral quotas. Each developing country was given a quota of how many pairs of trousers or how many women's shirts made of cotton it was allowed to export to each developed country market. During the Uruguay round, it was decided that this whole system would go away over a 10-year period, because everybody was quite scared of what would happen when it goes away. It was actually phased, all the hard work was left until the very end, right? And the shock happened on January 1st, 2005. MFA was dismantled, so now Asian producers such as China, India, Bangladesh, and so on and so forth could actually have unrestrained access to developed country markets. Now, Turkey and India had been main suppliers of textiles and clothing to the EU, to the European Union, which is the market we are going to look at. But Turkey was fortunate enough to have customs union with the EU since 1996. Therefore, since 1996, Turkish exporters were able to sell textiles and clothing to the EU without being constrained by any quota, right? Then, suddenly these quotas that were constraining Chinese and other exporters to the EU were gone on January 1st, 2005. And that was a big shock to Turkish exporters, right? So they are selling happily, humming along, supplying the EU market, and suddenly, boom, right? China is unleashed, and they are facing increased competition. And what's particularly nice from our perspective is that not all quotas were binding, right? Chinese exporters were filling in quotas in some products, but not all of them. So therefore, there is a difference in terms of how big the shock to competition was, right? If quotas were filled, that suggests that the exports were constrained. Once they were gone, Chinese exports would go up. If quotas were unfilled, you wouldn't expect such a big effect. Our data covers, in principle, our data could cover the universe of Turkish exports, but because of the nature of the shock we are interested in, we'll look just at textiles and clothing. We know how much of each product each firm exported to a particular market in a given year. So for each observation, we know the value of exports of women's shirts to Germany, we know the quantity, and we also know how each of these transactions was financed. Turkey is unique in that they collect very detailed information on how international trade transactions are financed, and it's not just that you actually, just state. You actually need to provide proof how each transaction is being financed. And of course, we have also data on quota fill rates. Now, before I go further, I want to say a few words about how international trade transactions are typically financed, how they are structured. So you can have a situation where the importer prepays, right? So from the perspective of Turkey, it's cash in advance. Turkish exporter gets money, then they ship the goods. The goods arrive in the EU after a period of time. In this case, it's the importer who extends the credit, and it's the importer who bears the risk that the goods will never arrive. You can do the opposite, which is called open account. That means that the Turkish firm produces the goods, ships them abroad, but then bears the risk of whether or not they will be paid. Now, there's also an option the partners have to push the risk onto somebody else, onto a bank. The importer can purchase something called letter of credit, which means that the bank will guarantee that nobody will be cheated in this transaction. So the importer purchases a letter of credit, the exporter gets this information, goods are shipped. The bank has the paperwork that gives you the ownership of the goods. Once the importer pays the exporter, the bank will release the money will release the paperwork, which gives you the ownership to the goods of the goods to the importer. So there is no risk involved, but it costs money. Anecdotal evidence suggests that fees for letter of credit are on the order of 3% of the value of the transaction. There's also something called documentary collection, which means that the bank acts as an intermediary but does not take full responsibility for payment being made. Here, the bank will still handle the paperwork that gives ownership of the goods, and the bank will give this paperwork to the importer in exchange for a legal document where the importer says, I will make this payment. So it is much safer than open account, and it's also much cheaper than letter of credit. So these are 4 principal ways of structuring export transactions. If you look at trade between Turkey and Turkish exports to the EU in the relevant products, 60% of exports in 2002, so that's prior, a couple years before the shock, went on open account terms. There was pretty much no cash in advance. You know, Turkey does not have a reputation as being a very reliable partner, so that's no surprise. Letter of credit and documentary collections were much more prominent. If you think about relationship between quota fill rate and open account, so open account is what we think of as trade credit, right? That's the situation where the exporter extends credit to the importer, and often it means that the payment can be made with a delay. So the dashed lines, these lines show you that prior to the shock, so in 2003, 2004, there was a slight positive relationship between quota fill rate, right, MFA quota fill rate, and provision of trade credit. Now, in 2005, when quotas were gone, you can see that in products that quotas were binding previously, there was a big jump in the share of Turkish exports that were coming with trade credit. Now, in this paper, we have a theoretical model. I don't have time to discuss it in detail. Let me just say that the model predicts that an increase in competition, which we model as a shock to the outside option of the importer, right? So if the importer has better outside option because now there are more suppliers, right? Chinese suppliers can sell goods more cheaply. This shock to competition will translate into greater share of exports, Turkish exports coming with trade credit. This shock will also mean that for any type of financing, Turkish exporters will drop prices, but the drop in prices will be smaller if they also throw in trade credit, right? So if they adjust on both. So let me now talk about our empirical strategy and the results. So the question we are asking, did Turkish exporters increase provision of trade credit after the MFA disappeared in goods where quotas were binding relative to the goods where quotas were not binding, right? So in other words, you have pre-shock period before MFA goes away and after the shock period. And then we have 2 types of products. We have products where imports from China were constrained by MFA quota. That's where we expect big adjustment. And we have products where quotas were going unfilled, so where we expect less adjustment. So this would be our control product. So in our baseline equation, we look at 2 periods. Now, our variable of interest, our first variable of interest, is share of exports that firm I sells product J to country D at time T. So firm 1 sells women's dresses to Germany in 2004. We calculate what share of those exports were done on open account. In other words, what share of those exports came with trade credit provided by the exporter. Because we want to separate the trade credit channel from prices, when we calculate this share, we will actually use quantities, not values. Because we know how many women's shirts made of cotton firm 1 was selling to Germany. Now, we also, because we want to deal with pre-trends a bit, we could be estimating this in levels, and it works in levels, but we want to be tougher. So we will look at the change, at the adjustment in the intensity of provision of trade credit. And we will look at the adjustment between 2003 and 2004, that's prior to the shock, and the adjustment from 2004 to 2005, that's after the shock. And the variable, the coefficient of interest is going to be this B1. B1 will ask, were treated products, so products where the quotas were binding before, did they see a bigger adjustment in the post-shock period, that is in 2005. Right, so standard dipping dip. In a sense, you can think of this as triple dip because the left-hand side is a change as well. We don't need to put a dummy for treated products because we have dummy for product fixed effects. We don't need a post-dummy because we have fixed effect for destination year. And these are all European Union countries. And in our tougher specification, we will also control for exporter year fixed effects, right? So these are exporters, they are selling multiple products to multiple countries. So if there is some shock that affected a given exporter in a given year, it will be taken out by this problem. We will also repeat this exercise for changing prices, so changing unit values, right? So we expect an increase in trade credit, but we expect a decrease in the coefficient for unit value. And we cluster standard errors at the product level. Now note, there were some products, when MFA went away, there was something called bra wars in the EU. Some Chinese imports of clothing were held up in warehouses, sort of pending some measures to block them. We would exclude those products from the analysis. Okay, how is our treatment determined? We determine treatment in 2 ways. So it's either a dummy for fill rate being 50% or more, or zero otherwise. So only products where quota fill rate was above 50% are defined as treated, or we actually use continuous quota fill rate. Actually, the exact cutoff here doesn't matter. We tried different ones. Everything works. So here, if you look at quota fill rate and the change in provision of trade credit before the end of the MFA, you see pretty much straight lines, right? There wasn't that much of a relationship. Look what happened afterwards, right? So in 2005, you can see that for products where quotas were going pretty much unfilled, there is no relationship between quota fill rate and adjustment. And this adjustment in share of trade credits pretty much hovers around 0. While for products where quotas were filled about 50%, there is a positive relationship between fill rate and adjustment, right? So you can graphically see evidence that if fill rate was higher, there was an increase in trade credit extended by Turkish exporters. You can do the same thing for prices, right? Prior to the shock, actually in both products, there was some positive increase in prices. After the shock, you see this big dip for treated products, and it's actually systematically related to the quota fill rate. Let me give you some summary statistic. Our average firm exports 9 products. They export to about 6 European Union countries. On average, they have 4.5 products per destination. Yes. Oh, I need to look this way. Yes. Yeah.
Various dimensions of like the deal, how attractive the deal is to the customer, and you got to make the deal more attractive to the customer, and you do that both ways.
Well, so the answer is yes and yes, right? So how you structure a transaction, how you finance a transaction is one of the parameters of transaction, right? Yeah. So it makes sense that you would be adjusting along multiple dimensions. Now, do firms have different ability to adjust along various dimensions? Absolutely, right? And we worry about that, and that's why we include this firm year fixed effects, because some firms may be able to better adjust along the price dimension or along credit dimension, right? Because not every firm has equal access to credit. And in a sense, what I will try to convince you that there is some substitution between the two, right? If you can't adjust trade credit, you have to drop the price by more. We have 338 firms exporting treated products prior to the shock, and we have 95 treated products and 313 untreated products. On average, a firm average value of products sold by a given exporter per destination is $280,000 US dollars. So finally, some results. So this is the equation. We look at the adjustment in trade credit. So change in the share of exports by firm I, product J to market D at time T. So this is share in terms of quantity. What share of that flow was with on open account terms, i.e. was accompanied by trade credit, right? And here you see the beta post times treated. In the first specification, we just have country year and product year fixed effects. In the second one, we add firm year fixed effects, right? We worry about those firms. And what you see is positive, statistically significant relationship, right? After the shock, products that were hit harder see an increase in provision of trade credit by about 5%, right? This effect is somewhat smaller, is close to 4% when you control for firm year fixed effects. If you use continuous quota fill rate, you get the same message, and if you look at the magnitudes, if you compare quota fill rate, between 25th percentile and 75th percentile, you get similar magnitudes. What about prices? Again, it's the same equation. It's just that the left-hand side is now change in prices. You see that products where quotas were binding saw a decline in prices after the shock of about 7% or 7.5%, depending on the specification. Right? So you see Turkish exporters are throwing in trade credit, and they are also dropping the prices. And the same message is there if you look at the continuous measure of quota fill rate. Now we do a series of robustness check. The first, and Daniel is my helper here, the first thing we do is a placebo test, and then we show, Daniel? Perfect, thank you, great job. So what we do is we pretend that the shock happened a year earlier, right? We pretend that the shock did not happen on January 1st, 2005. We pretend that it happened on January 1st, 2004. Okay, maybe if you do that, nothing is significant, and look, these coefficients are very, very small. Then, okay, could you do the longer time period, please? Second one. Okay, here, what we do is we look at multiple years, right? And we start in 2000, so 2003 is the baseline year, and we ask, okay, was the adjustment happening in 2004, 2005, that's where the shock happened, was it happening later? And you can see that nothing is significant in 2004, so that is year prior to the shock, and all the adjustments, right, most of happened in 2005. If we could go back, please. Thank you very much. Let me skip this controlling for survival in the interest of time. Thank you, that's it. So now, let me give you the last message. So we do a little exercise saying, does it matter whether or not a flow survives? We predict probability of survival and actually show that it doesn't affect our results in a significant manner. So the final question we ask, is there evidence that you substitute one margin of adjustment for the second one? Right? And now, we experimented with getting at this question in various ways, you know, trying to have system of equations, instrumenting for adjustment, but it was getting sort of very involved, and people didn't quite like it that much. So now we do something really, really simple. We basically said, if initially, prior to the shock, you were already throwing a lot of trade credit, you have less room for adjustment, right? If you were maxed out on trade credit, then you can't offer anymore, right? Because trade credit can't go beyond 100%. So we expect that exporters who were already extending trade credit prior to the shock will be adjusting less through trade credit, therefore they will need to do greater adjustment through prices. So essentially what this means is that we look at the adjustment of prices, and in addition to what we had before, post times treated, we interact this post times treated with what was the share of transactions that went on trade credit prior to the shock. And prior to the shock, that's 2000 to 2003. So remember, MFA goes away on January 1st, 2005. So we look a few years before. We take the average 40 to Z, right? And what we believe that if you were offering a lot of trade credit before that, your adjustment you will need to drop price by more. Yes. Yeah, but we don't do max out. We actually use continuous measure. This was just an example to sort of explain it. Right? So it's a continuous measure. This is average share for that flow between 2000 to 2003. Right? Now, first, before showing this, I need to show you that actually it matters, right? That if you were throwing a lot of credit before, you are giving less credit afterwards. So here in the left column, we just look at change in share of open account, right? And this is the same dummies as before. This is with Fermier fixed effect. If 2000, 2003, you were offering a lot of trade credit, you will be offering less, you will be increasing trade credit by less, as you would expect. The increase in trade credit will be greater for affected products after the shock, but it will be smaller if the provision for trade credit was large before. Now, getting at the substitution, right? You see that after the shock, prices of products that were, so these are prices of treated products after the shock, they were dropping by more if a firm was offering a lot of trade credit to begin with for the product, right? So that suggests that there is some substitution between the two margins of adjustment. So, to conclude, within my 30 minutes, yes?
I have a couple of questions before you move to the conclusions. So, here it seems that the exporter there's a transfer of risk from importers to exporters once you face competition, right? Like the exporter is bearing now more risk because of this additional competition. So do you have a sense of how this created changes in the distribution of exporters in the Turkish market? Because I guess more productive, firms with a longer standing in export markets have an advantage compared to new entrants and so on.
So here, this wouldn't be affecting our results because we dummy this out.
Right.
You know, we thought, is it that they are taking on perhaps too much risk and dropping like flies? No. For instance, we don't see much exit. We don't see many of these firms dying, right? So what is happening is they are bearing more risk, but also they are saving importer money because now the importer does not have to pay for documentary collection or for letter of credit. But we were hoping there would be some adverse effects, but we haven't found that. Now, in terms of distribution, there's nothing that's extremely striking, or at least nothing that was terribly interesting to us. Having said that, we haven't explored all the possible channels.
Right, and a follow-up on this question. So I guess another option is that you have specialized banks in Turkey that are kind of absorbing part of that risk that the exporter is facing by opening lines of credit and so on. Do you have any sense of whether that happens or not?
So a natural thing would be, is it the Turkish government is stepping in and is providing insurance, right? Now, what happens in Turkey is, if you are a firm and you are exporting, you need to buy insurance for all of your transactions, for your whole portfolio of export. And that gets very expensive, right? Because firm would want to insure only some transactions. So as far as we understand, there hasn't been a big policy change here that would remedy the situation. It seems like Turkish exporters took on more risk, right, in the face of the shock. And that's what allowed them to adjust. So, Eric, yeah, question. So what I've tried to convince you is that extending trade credit is another margin through which firms adjust to increased competition in export markets. That in the Turkish case, we see that they threw in trade credit, they dropped prices, and there is some evidence of substitution between these two margins of adjustment. So if you couldn't adjust your trade credit by a lot, you had to drop your prices by much. Why does it matter? Well, it matters because if you are studying price responses to competition in export markets and you don't take into account this credit channel, you will actually get the wrong estimate, right? Because here you'll say, well, you know, the adjustment of prices wasn't so great because you are missing the part that now Turkish exporters are given trade credit, which is also costly to them, right? So you may get wrong impression of how much, of how adjustment is being done. You may be underestimating the adjustment cost for the exporters. It also has policy implication because, and actually that if you are exporting from a country that is perceived as risky, provision of trade credit is important. Being able to provide trade credit to your partners is important because they are most likely unwilling to give you cash in advance. And being able to do so can give you an edge in competitive markets, right? And so that's something that perhaps would apply to African exporters. So thank you very much.
The paper's objective contribution is really to show a new margin of adjustment. This idea of the provision of trade credit as a margin of adjustment in response to an increase in international competition. And this increase in international competition is a special type. It's an increase in international competition in the destination market. To disentangle these relationships, Beata looks at two types of effects. One is the provision of credit, and the second one, lowering the prices. Basically, in the face of additional competition, the firm can react by offering either more favorable payment conditions or by lowering the price of its product. She didn't present here, but she has a theoretical framework in her model with very clear predictions. And I think this is very interesting in the paper because she really goes from the predictions to the data and tests them very closely. The empirical strategy is very clear. There is an exogenous shock, a particular one, the end of this multi-fiber arrangement that generated a quota removal on China, and that happened at the end of 2004. Some products were binded by this quota, others weren't. So this is where the differences across products within firms exist. So the treatment group is the products that were binded by the existing quota prior to the shock. Her data is at the firm product destination level, is not transaction level specifically, is very rich because it has this open account component, so we know exactly the share of all exports of the firm where the firm had offered trade credit. It's for Turkey and covers the period 2002-2007. And I did it again. Okay. So in terms of contribution, the approach I think is very interesting. In the model, she has exogenous buyers that value that have different valuations, and they basically differ in this trade-off that they face between offering trade credit and asking for bank finance. And the increase in the competition is really improves in the foreign markets the outside options of these buyers there. So when she goes to the empirical analysis, she uses this indeed and explores the direct effects on the trade credit and on the change in prices. But she also argues theoretically and also empirically checks this, whether there is a substitution between the providing credit or lowering the price. And I think this part of the analysis is very interesting as well. So what are the main findings? First, evidence that indeed exports sold on credit, they increase when there is this shock on competition. There is also a lowering of prices that is bigger for the treatment group, and there is substitution effects between trade credit and lowering the price. So my overall impression of this work, I think this is a very relevant question, like the title. You can either throw support, throw insurance to the exporters in these transactions, or you can open lines of credit to facilitate this relationship. So very important policy question, very interesting and clear paper. I think having this new evidence for a developing country is very important, and is a very uncommon type of data, so it's clearly worth analyzing it. And importantly, in a time where margins of adjustment are so important, having these new dimensions is very interesting. The paper, as Beata showed you, has several robustness checks, including a convincing placebo test, and that is also very reassuring. And the part on the interaction, I find it very cool. So now the suggestions. The first group of suggestions that I have to do exactly with the kind of the assumptions that one normally has to fulfill in order for a disindex to be valid. So one of the things that people have to check is whether the treatment and control group have parallel trends in outcome. And Beata does some effort to show this, but the pre-shock trends are for 1 year. So my question is, could the authors acquire more data to check a longer time span? In this work of Galliani, this waterfall seminar paper on this and this, they have many data points before the shock to argue that the parallel trends are there. The second point is kind of this idea that the treatment group and the control group are very similar and they are almost interchangeable. So do products with binding quotas are really similar to products that do not have binding quotas in terms of propensity to offer credit? Could they be a selected group? So, for example, you show that the unit value of the treated group is much lower than the unit value on the control group. Could it be that really they are worse products by worse firms that have more difficulty having reputation or accessing financing? And this question kind of came up, but you said when is a characteristic of firm, it's washed out by the firm year fixed effect. But what if it is a characteristic of the product firm destination, the relationship itself between this trading partner for that product and destination? So my second set of comments, I would like to see as a reader maybe a bit more of analysis of the composition of the sample in treatment and control groups before and after the intervention to make sure that the composition of the sample didn't change with the shock. Kind of arguing this. And another thing that I thought was, now your measure is the share of open accounts in total exports, but you use quantity, physical quantities of exports because you don't want to use the price, the value of the exports because you're capturing the price effect. Could there be also quantity effects? So, because I think analyzing whether there will be quantity effects would be interesting in itself, and also it would be reassuring to see that that measure is not biased by changes in product mix of the exports within a firm. So I think this would be an interesting addition and one that would add value. So the other thing is kind of this implicit idea that, you know, by offering credit, then you offer more favorable conditions, and therefore the export flow would continue. Is this the case? Do firms that offer trade credit then have more, in the future, more stable market shares in these destinations? Does it work? Kind of question. And a link point is when looking at prices, whether you could have firm product destination effect plus year effect separately to exactly a bit control for this type of effect. My third set of comments is kind of subgroup analysis, right? So more heterogeneity of effects, if you could look more at the heterogeneity of effects. And what am I thinking of? Even within the EU, there are many different types of markets, high income versus low income, tougher competition markets versus not so competitive markets. So could you look at that dimension? Could you look at large firms versus small firms, high productivity firms versus low productivity firms? And also control within product destination itself, those that had a very high number of exporters per shock, so lots of competition, versus those that were in markets that were very concentrated in the destination market pre-shock. And this is more like additional work. So this was a specific shock in a specific industry, the textile and clothing. So here I'm kind of asking, could you use not more direct, but additional measures of the degree of competition to check the robustness of your results? For example, I'm thinking about changes in the real exchange rate or the China shock a la Alter, Dorn, and Hansen. So then you could argue that this is more general type of effect, which I think would be very interesting. And if you have it, could you use Chinese product level data to see, in fact, if their level of increase in penetration in the destination markets, if it affects Turkish firms? So check this directly. And finally, kind of an interpretation of the results, kind of broader. So you see that international competition leads firms to decrease the price. There is this literature where competition leads to increase in product quality. This paper by Amiti and Kendall for 2013. So how should we interpret your effect of competition on prices? And second, where does it come from? It can come from three different channels, at least: the quality, the cost, or the margin. If the lowering in price happens because the cost fell or the markups fell, it's kind of a positive thing. But if it happened because the quality is now worse, I think it's kind of a different type of discussion. And kind of leads me to my last point, whether, you know, products with larger price drops, could they be special in terms of being products where the scope for quality upgrading was really much lower, and this would affect the results. So these were some ideas that I had while reading the paper, but Beata's very, very interesting paper, and I think it's an important contribution to the literature, and a topic that is very relevant with a lot of policy implications, and really thank you. It was a pleasure to read it, and I hope these comments help you.
So I concur. It's a very nice paper. But I wanted to second the point that Joanna made about heterogeneity, and you made the point that you have firm fixed effects in there, and so that sort of captures some of that heterogeneity. But there's also heterogeneity in the response to the shock, right, which is not captured by the firm fixed effect, which I think would be very interesting to look at. Both young and old, as we're talking about, across sectors, across destinations, all those things seem quite useful to do.
So we did, right? And
my question was more about how much of this shock was anticipated. So it was announced and firms could have reacted earlier. We didn't have a chance to see the whole model, but in the context of the model, would firms be expected to react earlier if they knew about the shock? And also whether this matters for the last set of analysis where you look at substitution between price and response. If firms reacted indeed earlier, then they have less scope to react. So this may bias a bit your analysis in that part.
So
very interesting paper. Thank you very much. I just wanted to ask if you looked at the firms itself, because the features of the firms can condition a bit the reaction they have to it. So are they big, small? As Joanna has said, I think that the behavior is it's not very clear if they had exactly the same behavior of the last 10 years. Do they usually have access to trade, or it's a mixed if firms completely different reacted exactly the same, or completely different, they had all the same reaction to this treatment? Thank you.
So was it anticipated? So in theory, everybody knew for 10 years, right? That's what happened. In practice, most people did not believe it. And I had yesterday lunch with the EU negotiator, somebody who actually negotiated this, and he told me, in Brussels there were demonstrations, right? Firms thought that could be still reversed. My understanding, his reading was that firms start preparing at the last possible moment. So we believe that if there was some preparation, that should lower the impact, right? So it should work against us finding an effect. But nevertheless, that's why when we look at substitution, we look at 2002, 2003 data, right? Rather than, for instance, 2004, because we just want to be extra careful. In terms of did this identical firms reacted in a different way or different? Interesting question. We haven't quite given it that much thought, because I think it's sort of not trivial to identify identical firms and not identical firms, but certainly we can think about this more.